I'd like to invite our final panel to join us and thank them for their flexibility and all of you for sticking around. We've just heard about the importance of regional air service and air service in communities and to their economy. So our closing panel will focus on the importance of air service in small communities from a lot of different stakeholder perspectives. Our moderator is Lori Aratani of the Washington Post. Lori covers all forms of transportation for the Post, including airlines, airports, railroads, and subways. She's tracked aviation very well and thoughtfully, and we're excited to have her join us and lead this panel. So please join me in welcoming Lori.
Hi, thank you all for having me. I know we are standing between you and lunch, but we will make this interesting and fun and send you off hopefully on a good note. I'd like to welcome our panels to come up. I'm going to take a cue from Sam and have them introduce themselves. So if you all could do that, that would be great. Actually, I have a little introduction, and then I'll have you all introduce. I'm going to stand here. Okay. Yeah, I didn't mic up, so there we go. I know to many in this room, this is not a new story, the loss of air service in small communities, but it's one that is definitely taking on greater urgency as more communities lose their connection to the larger network, hastened by hopefully this once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. I think we learned during yesterday's sessions there are about 332 airports that have lost service since the pandemic began, and 8 cities have gone completely dark. And this all comes at a time when I think it was Eric Morgan who said, the opportunities to serve small cities are better than they have ever been. Most folks in this room believe there is a future for small community air service. I think Steve's presentation showed that, it can look pretty dark, but then there is a curve that's going upward, so that's reason to be hopeful. And we are very fortunate to have a very distinguished panel here with us to explore this question and offer their thoughts about what communities might be able to do to retain, attract, and rebuild service at a time when the deck kind of seems stacked, this pilot shortage thing that folks are talking about. Taking a cue from Sam, I'd love to have you all introduce yourselves, please.
Okay, I'll go first. Dion Flannery, President and CEO of PSA Airlines, wholly owned subsidiary of American, and the RAA board chair.
Courtney Miller, I'm the founder of Visual Approach Analytics. I also provide analysis to the Air Current, and once a year I come and talk to the RAA about a pilot shortage.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brad Van Dam with the American Association of Airport Executives, where I work on federal affairs, legislative matters, and handle contract tower-related issues.
I'm Mike Hall, Immediate Past President of the New York Aviation Management Association and principal at PFA Consulting, which is a leadership services business.
Great. I think it's great that we have such a diverse viewpoints on this panel. And I know that there haven't been a lot of questions during other panels because you all have been saving up. So we will be waiting for you to line up at the mics with your questions for our panelists. But I guess one thing I thought we might start with is, the aviation industry, as I'm learning, as I'm trying to be a better reporter and writer about the industry, is cyclical. It goes up and down. We all wish it might always go up. But are there lessons from previous downturns that might help provide us with a blueprint for moving forward, things that have, as the industry tries to rebuild and rethink old business models, come up with new business models?
Well, sir, I'll start off with this tough question. Thanks, Lori, for that one. It is cyclical. You're absolutely right on that. I think the pandemic has turned things around a little bit. We're facing challenges like we never have before. So I think we're in kind of a unique situation here. I think the airlines and the aviation industry caught off guard by how quick the recovery was. And that's led to increasing problems with the pilot shortage that we're all experiencing. So there are downturns that we can look at as a historical reference. You look at the Great Recession in 08 and 09, downturn then, the impact that it had on the aviation industry. 9/11, of course, you have those events, those big time events that had an impact on our industry. But I think we're in kind of uncharted waters here with the pandemic, some unique challenges with the pilot shortage, the transition to larger aircraft that are impacting air service opportunities for small airports around the country. So history, I think, is a guide, but I think we have some unique challenges here brought upon by the pandemic that all of us have to face.
I wholly agree with that. I mean, my answer would have been a simple no. He was much more eloquent. But that it gets to exactly what we just experienced, right? I mean, like the worst we ever felt before was 2008. Well, let's say 9/11, right? If you really look at the absolute worst that traffic dropped, I think it was like 20% for very briefly. We were down to measly 97.5%. We rebuilt the aviation industry globally, by the way, from 97.5% down to, what are we now, about 5% down on traffic. We're actually, if you take into account fares, the higher fares, we're well over demand. Revenues are all higher. So we're coming out of something we've never experienced before with factors that we've never experienced before. And the reason why I say no is because it requires a different way to approach it. Because I think there's been a lot of sense of, well, I sit around, do nothing, it fixes itself. And there are unique challenges right now, specifically with the regional airlines, with all the airlines globally, regionally. And I would challenge people to look at this situation differently for sure.
I think that the pandemic's been a catalytic event. The pressure builds up between the tectonic plates, to use another analogy, and then all of a sudden there's an earthquake. And this was a much bigger earthquake, but I think what it did was it set the stage in an industry that's been evolving in many ways. And all of a sudden there's an opportunity to move to a new business plan for the future. And I think that's the key word. I think that since deregulation, air service, particularly at the small community level, has become increasingly a business issue. And the challenge that small communities have right now is you can't build it and they'll come. You've got to put together, as our previous speaker most eloquently described, a business case and a business plan for why you need air service as part of your economy. And I think it's particularly challenging because most of us see air service anecdotally through our own lens. As he suggested, 50% of the people, we want to go to Florida or something. There's a next step in organization at the community level that's critical here, and that is the economic development activity. The Chamber of Commerce, however it's squared away in your community, needs to be a real focal point for making the case. And when you do that, not only will you be more informed as a community, but you'll have a rationale to sit down with a carrier and say, let's communicate across difference here and let me explain to you why I think our market is valuable to you. And for sure don't make the mistake of thinking that somebody in Chicago or Atlanta or Dallas-Fort Worth is paying attention every minute of the day to your small market. You've got to help them by doing their work for them.
Dion, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if communities are probably increasingly making their case, please come to us, please expand, please don't take away. So what are the factors that when you all are trying to design your network or think about a community, I mean, Chicago is not the same as Williamsport, which is not the same as Eau Claire. Are there, economics I know is really important, but are there other factors that come into play when you're looking at the map and you're thinking where you want to fly?
Yeah, Lori, great question, and I harken back to the days as a network planner at Continental and in the days that preceded and in years that followed September 11th, and that changed a lot around planning, long-range planning and fleet deployment and the types of aircraft that are used. But I know that one thing is still the same. The value of the brand for major carriers is their network. It's built upon the foundation of a network that has deep and wide-ranging reach. So scope of service and depth of service are what drive critical utility to passengers who choose to assign their affinity to one carrier or another, and in so doing get a better return on their investment. And so it does start though with, our view was always pretend we're buying an aircraft when we make a route decision, and would you buy an aircraft and put it on 16-year debt instrument to serve this market? And the answer has to be only if it can pay for itself on deployed capital you have to have certainty that you're going to use that asset productively. If you can't, then you're buying on the margin, and that's a bad investment. And of course, everything needed to hurdle. Some things jumped off the map and looked really good. But the world doesn't stand still. Carriers compete, services are added, and the world changes. And what is an opportunity to a community one day that looks very fruitful may change or get competed away over time. But just the same, demand in this country for services, we've been talking about it, continues to go up. And it's not just demand that was sidelined during COVID. Aviation service in this country is a huge economic driver, and consumers continue to grow their demand for it. So in particular, it starts with economics, and the economics help accumulate to what's the most valuable cities that we can serve, and how does that in fact hold the brand together and build the return of the network altogether.
Anybody else? Well, I know we've been talking a lot about different changes that can come with pilot training in that area. And there's been a lot of talk about the 1500 rule. It looks like, that may not be going away anytime soon. But I'm curious, with all the technological advances in simulator training, is there room within that 1500-hour rule to rethink where that training might come from? Could you rethink how it's allocated more from simulators? Could a case be made for that? Is that a way to sort of ensure their safety, perhaps speed the certification a little quicker? Is there anything there?
I think you accidentally highlighted the absurdity of the rule. The idea is to increase safety. I can't remember who said it yesterday, but it was very well put. The idea of training versus application requirements. But then, we find ourselves in the challenge right now of, the time required from a solution to seeing results is going to put us past the trough of this pilot shortage. This is the problem. Last year, I stood right there and said, somebody asked me what keeps me up at night. I can still see the worn carpet where I was walking when I said, I think the pilot shortage could be really bad really soon. I did not know how bad, how soon. We're living right now in worst case scenario, it's slightly worse. But something else happened this summer, and that was peak visibility. Not only was this a regional airline problem, this was a mainline airline problem, right? I mean, all the airlines saw it. The problem now is that we're moving past peak visibility. So like these questions on what can we do training-wise, and yes, we can always improve safety, and actually this industry is fantastic at that already. I think the concern for us is that we are exiting peak visibility right now, and not with good news on Monday either. So how do we go forward without the attention that has been so extreme over the last 3 months, because this is extended to the mainline carriers, to the low-cost carriers. And that's going to be even more challenging going forward. I know I hijacked your question, but there's an answer.
I'm going to flip here, and as Courtney did last time, I'll just answer it yes. Yes, there's been applications, there's been plenty of representation brought forward to sharpen the way that we train and produce certified pilots in this country. The rest of the world is doing it. We know that for a fact. And so there's unlimited opportunities to use technology, in particular advanced simulation, mentorship, initial operating experience, to take a qualified pilot and produce a safer product every single day. And we just need people to listen to the data, view it, and come together on it. We're training pilots in a prescriptive format that was put in place over 11 years ago. What industry doesn't evolve in 11 years? I can tell you one that's not going to grow and one that's not going to be productive. So we've got to find a way to have that objective dialogue with regulators, with safety, with the community, and all the stakeholders, and examine what's available.
Or I'll just add on to that. That all makes perfect sense, and I think everyone in this room would agree with the need to look at new technology to help us train pilots quicker and a little bit easier. But the political reality is that this continues to be a stumbling block on Capitol Hill. And unfortunately, I don't see that going away anytime soon. You heard Senator Cruz talk about he may be the chair or ranking member of the Senate Commerce Committee, depending on the outcome of the elections in November. But the majority on either side is going to be really slim. And you're going to have Senator Schumer there, whether he's the Democratic leader or the Republican leader, is going to continue, I think, to raise objections to altering the $1,500 rule or looking at reasonable ideas like simulator training to try to address the problems that we're facing. I suppose if things really get bad, maybe that'll encourage people to take another look at this. If members of Congress start realizing that they're losing air service in their districts or states and it's harder for them to get home on a regular basis, maybe that turns the tide, but I don't see that happening right now. So I think we've got to look at the political side as well as the policy side of this debate, because it's a huge issue up on Capitol Hill, and I don't see a lot of ground that we're making up on that, despite the fact that we've been trying for several years.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think one of the problems is, I hate the analogy, but I mean, this is boiling the frog. The change is happening rapidly, but not rapidly enough in terms of a shock factor, like a total disruption to the aviation system, right? That, whether it be September 11th or it be a pandemic, where everybody saw very rapidly, the empty seats or a lack of service. This is happening on the increment, and the increment is speeding up. But communities are behind the power curve here, and I don't think collectively they see this, the depth of the problem that's emerging very rapidly. And that, again, we've talked about it. What would a day without regional operations feel like in the United States? Right? We just averted a rail strike. Somebody was making mention of that, and what that would have done to the supply chain. I think that would crystallize for the public the importance of service to communities. We put statistics up. Faye and her team does a fantastic job chronologing how important air service is and what percentage of operations are represented by regionals. But until you feel it and you don't have the trip and you can't, your community is not served and you're not able to serve the business interests that within, it has a different meaning. And I just think that this is going to continue, the temperature is going to continue to go up on it, but it's just happening at too slow of a pace for people to feel the sheer magnitude of the impact.
So there's a broad issue here of communicating across differences in an industry that's evolving really very quickly. In the years I've been flying, the whole aviation industry has changed remarkably. We'd have to talk for hours about what it was like then and what it's like today. And I think that plus the lack of understanding in general about our industry is our key challenge. And when technology comes along, it's not just about simulation and training pilots. We're very concerned about pilot shortages right now. A couple of years from now in this meeting, we may be concerned about maintenance technicians, or we may be concerned about dispatchers or other systems. And so the whole industry is evolving, the business is evolving very rapidly. It's absolutely necessary to incorporate new levels of technology in order to operate efficiently as the industry changes, and that brings about the paradox that was mentioned earlier, where Southwest originally wanted to have analog gauges on their glass displays, or where the air traffic controller still wanted strips when they went to the next gen air traffic control system. So a big part of our challenge as an industry is to communicate across difference and help people understand, not just elected officials, but the chambers of commerce, the economic development people, all those entities need to hear what we have to share in the way of information and the importance of this industry to our overall economy, indeed to global security. We contribute 3% of the carbon load and about 90% of the bringing the world together as one human population. It's a pretty good trade-off.
I had one more question on the pilot. This came up during some of the panels yesterday, and I was intrigued by this idea that, there are more efforts to get people in the door, right? Once they're in the door, there seems to be a little bit of a bottleneck trying to get people from the right seat to the left seat, to make that transition from first officer to captain. I know that, we're hearing all these trends about how people's views of work-life balance have changed during the pandemic, the whole quiet quitting. Are there, I don't know if there's also a way to relook at how to make that captain's job. I always assumed a captain's job was super appealing, but it sounds like people don't always want to move to that seat. So are there things to be considered there to try and encourage people to make that leap, to make that an extra investment?
As a former first officer who never did make that leap, I would challenge that and say, this is the work-life balance that they're seeking. And the problem that we have now with, and it's a real problem, it's the bottleneck, or at least the tightest bottleneck, is moving from right seat to left seat. That's because of the additional 1,000 hours required. That rule's been there for, well, as long as I've been around. So that's not new, but that's a throughput problem, right? That's not really systemic. That's because we're moving so many pilots through the system so quickly that they don't have the time to sit where they are long enough to qualify. Then you have the question of how many people want to be career first officers, and well, why not? You know what? That's more appealing to more people to bring into the industry, that you don't just have to go out and grind hours. Well, you do to get to be a pilot, but to grind further hours to go and sit left seat at United, it's okay. It's okay to be a career regional pilot. You know how many of those there are? It's a lot. This is not to be avoided. I think this is a great recruiting tool for the industry. I would seek those out. Although the throughput's challenging right now for sure.
I think at PSA we had seen this problem evolving or emerging years ago, and as compensation both for first officers and captains went up, the focus became less from a pilot's perspective of working to maximize the W-2 to seeing that naturally rise to quality of life, right? And to your point, Lori, we also see some emerging changes in behaviors, not just on the pilot side, but in every vocation, in every role, which is willingness to, as we used to call it in finance, follow the money. You're going to go from the right seat to the left seat as quickly as that opportunity presents itself. Otherwise, you're costing yourself your W-2. That doesn't happen necessarily. And as compensation has come up, it has further exacerbated the view that I don't need to do this. If you need more reasons, you had low-cost carriers who are hiring first officers at record paces as well, right? And so first officers could say, well, if I'm going to upgrade and go back, go through training, as Brian Bedford said yesterday, there's a risk element, there's a jeopardy element to every training event in a pilot's career. Do I go to do that, or do I take the risk of training at a carrier that has narrow body equipment? And so those are all the elements that are challenging first officers today and presenting opportunities in opposition to just, I'm going to upgrade when I get my opportunity. I think we've done at PSA made some efforts here to make that decision a little easier for them. I think the majors are helpful in saying that they always prefer PIC time to that just general time. And so a career is best served becoming a captain, professionally developing your skills, and that should afford you an opportunity to work at the next career step faster without any compensation opportunity cost. So it is there, and we're working through that constraint today.
So we've talked a lot about technology, but this starts to flirt around the edge of human factors. And diversity provides opportunity, but inclusion leverages opportunity into prosperity. So it's extremely important at the same time that our businesses are evolving at a pace greater than ever before in the history of our industry. And all this technology is coming in, that a lot of attention is paid yet to the people who need to take that technology and put it productively to work for the business. And that can include, among other things, a corporate culture that helps you decide whether or not you're legitimately able to move in certain places, in the industry, and whether you want to. So.
Okay. Well, this is a panel on community air service, so I want to get the community element in here. And I think Steve's presentation and his presentation did a very good job of laying out how communities, a blueprint for potentially how communities can tell their story and tell their whole story about the impact regional air service can have on their communities. So I'm curious, when communities go to make their case, or when they try and make their case for preserving air service, growing it, keeping it, getting it back, are there elements that they should include, or considerations are there things that they should include in making that case? And I think of this because I once had someone who told me, never go to your boss with just a problem. Because bosses hear about problems all day, and they are tired of hearing about problems. If you have a problem, try and come in with a solution. So is that something that could potentially work for communities as they're trying to make their case? It sounds like one of the things you have to do is make it broader than just the airport. You need to make it, but are there solutions that they can come in with when they're trying to make their case so, Dion's not just hearing about the problem?
You want to start?
No, I'll defer.
Okay.
Well, look, we can start right in the middle of this, and that is where the panel began. It's about economics in the end, and an airport is both a fixed infrastructure piece of cost and an operational cost. And anything you can do at a smaller airport where you're not going to be able to spread those costs over 5 million people, 10 million people, if you diversify the airport, you've got an opportunity. Is it a multi-mode transportation hub? What other activities are there helping to pay for the cost of the airport? So when you make your business case and go to the airline, you can say, well, here's a fair share of that, and that fair share that you're offering allows you to keep the airport open, but it also gives a business case to the airline that allows them to say, okay, we can live with that kind of cost per employment. That fits our model. So I think that the smaller the airport gets, the more diverse it needs to become. It needs to be a balance of GA and commercial air service. There need to be other activities associated with the infrastructure, and that was how I would answer that question, Laura.
And Laura, you've talked about this before, but of course, small communities, trying to sweeten the pot for the carriers to try to provide service to their local communities, minimum revenue guarantees, a lot of examples of that have taken place over the years. Some states are getting involved in that at a state level as opposed to just one by one in different airports. I think that's exceptionally helpful as communities try to convince carriers that it'll be profitable for them to come. As we just talked about, airlines are making an economic decision. If a route is going to work and it's profitable for them, they'll be inclined to do it, but if it's not, they won't. So if communities can come to the table with some minimum revenue guarantees, I think that'll give them some assurance that it's worth taking a risk on a new route. The problem is a lot of these small communities might not have the resources to be able to do that.
Right.
And at the end of the day, a lot of this isn't just about economics, it's whether carriers have the equipment and the pilots to do it. So this is one of those rare situations where you just can't throw money at the problem and hope to fix it. You've got other circumstances here that have to be dealt with, including the pilot shortage, and I think that's the problem that we're facing. That's why this is so different this time around, is that small community X in Montana or Wyoming, even if they come to the table with a big pot of money, that might not make the difference just because the carriers might not have the resources to provide the service in the first place.
And as the constraints grow, the pot has to get bigger, and what you may have been able to bid for and successfully secure one day may not be true the next. It's also been my experience, again, going back to planning and scheduling days, where multiple carriers that I worked for took place or took part in serving communities under subsidy or under revenue guarantees. And they're all well-intentioned, and it starts generally the same way with a meeting of the minds. This is a marketplace that can be supported, deserves a service. It can't stand on its own, but we can, if we're made whole, we can add it to the network, and we can afford you the reliability of service that other communities get. And I've always found that two things were true. The depth of service in those cities was small, so if you had a disruption, it was like a mechanical cancellation or something. The community had an outsized level of pain, as opposed to one that's well served, multiple times a day, even if it's on smaller regional aircraft. So you don't have the redundancy factor, and you don't have the same level of operational safety net behind it. And then invariably, in almost every one of those cases, when the guarantees were over, either another community outbid the incumbent, or it proved not to necessarily be capable of being sustained. So, and it's not to say it doesn't work, but there's, if it were a profit model, and maybe one will emerge in this new world of constrained pilot resources. But in previous decades, it was always sort of the last piece of the puzzle to solve, or the first one to be lost to another opportunity.
I mean, in the conversation, well, that we've been having as the RAA for over a decade, but really in the last couple of years about the pilot shortage, we talk about the disconnect between supply and demand, but we always talk about supply because it's what we do, right? We're suppliers, we're in the CPA or ACMI. I say we, but you as the airlines. I think it's time to really start considering demand. This week, Airports Council International had their annual meeting, their big conference in Minneapolis. I'll bet they care about a lot of this stuff, right? So this isn't the traditional regional airlines job. Actually, we'll call it the historic regional airlines job, not the new traditional regional airlines job. So instead of, we like to talk about, well, I mean, supply is a thing, and that's something that we actually have a fairly good handle on, the challenge. But the demand, and where we usually stop, is at the airport level or at the community level and say, well, you should do this, or your community this. The reality is that people aren't showing up to their airplanes in their small communities. Why? Where are they going? From the individual passenger level, what is this person doing in Muskegon? Is that right? Did they just lose service? Dubuque. What is happening to that individual person who now cannot fly out of their local airport? What are they doing? And they're still flying. They're still traveling. They're not just deciding to sit around. They're driving somewhere. So it's following the individual passenger. How Fort Collins, Colorado, for instance, provides 2,500 passengers per day to Denver International Airport. Fort Collins has its own airport, no flights. TSA service, no flights. 2,500 people drive every single day, an hour, whatever it is, to Denver International Airport from Fort Collins when there could be service there. That's what? I don't know, 13, 14 narrow-body aircraft a day out of an airport with no service. Right? Steve Martin mentioned that we don't know where the businesses and where these passengers are coming from. We actually do, to some degree, with a lot of the new data that we're working with. That I spent some time with some airlines working, saying, okay, where are the passengers actually coming from? Not where are they flying, where are they driving? This is what we want to know. So the challenge that I would give to the regional airlines is start to get involved in the demand side of the business. Historically, we're a CPA-driven industry, but we were pro-rate, right? We were on that side, picking routes, finding, doing the marketing. And I think we may need to start to consider how we go about doing that, not even from the traditional pro-rate versus CPA angle, but what are we doing to not serve the passengers? Why aren't they showing up? Why weren't they? And then when you throw in a supply crunch, as we do, we just give them more excuses to not show up to the airport where they used to. I think that's kind of the challenge that we're focusing on, more on the demand side for sure, going 5-10 years forward.
I know we've also talked about new technologies that are not coming online immediately, but is there a potential lifeline for small and mid-sized community airports with some of the new technologies that are potentially coming online in a few years?
There certainly is. 70 years ago, Mohawk Airlines with DC-3s had a very extensive intrastate network that served the economic development interests of New York. New York, of course, being a bit bipolar. We have the metropolitan area, which is going to get by just fine anyway, and then you've got a vast upstate New York. It's much easier to connect by air than it is by rail or canal or what the other options are. So I think that Garmin has already certified a pilot incapacitated auto land system on general aviation aircraft. The technologies are coming. There's a merger of UAS, unmanned aerial systems, and manned aerial systems. The technologies are going to provide opportunities for single pilot first in smaller aircraft and eventually perhaps throughout the industry. So there are things like that that will change the fundamental operating economics and allow perhaps a 10 or 12 seat Caravan, which is already flying with an electric engine, electric motor, to provide service economically to Jamestown, New York, where Southern was unable to do it with a turbine-powered Caravan. So technology is going to open windows that we can only begin to imagine today.
And of course, looking down the road, you've got other new technologies on the horizon, AAM, eVTOLs, all those new technologies that people are really, really excited about. I think the question there is, what kind of time frame are we looking at? And does that provide an option for small community air service? I suspect a lot of this is going to be walk before you can run. You'll look at some small package delivery, some of those things. You look at what the state of Ohio is doing on that front. They're doing a lot of great things there, trying to bring AAM options into the state, manufacturing, research, operations. They're focusing on a lot of different things, including healthcare options, where you can use AAM vehicles to help deliver medicines or healthcare professionals. All these different things that people are really starting to look at. But the question is, how far down the road is this going to be? And we've got challenges today. We've got a huge pilot shortage. We've got huge challenges facing small community air service. We can't afford to wait 5 or 10 years before this comes online. We have to deal with the issue now. So that's some long-term issues and potential for us that could help. But we have to look at what we're doing today and tomorrow to fix the problem that we're all experiencing right now.
I know the timing is hard, is difficult, right? Airports I know are still trying to rebuild their infrastructure for the system that we have now, let alone think in the future. But with the infrastructure money that's available, as they build, as they renovate and revamp, is it too early to be thinking about how the infrastructure might accommodate some of these, or should that also be a consideration?
It's a good question, Lori. I mean, if you look at airports today, the traditional infrastructure needs, there's a lot of unmet needs across the board. The airport, or the infrastructure bill that Congress passed, will help $20 billion for airports to pay for brick and mortar, runways, taxiways, terminals. All that will help. But that's only going to help us in the next 4 or 5 years. Airports are still facing more than $20 billion in annual infrastructure needs to meet traditional aviation requirements. That's before you get into the AAM stuff and all the technology and all the infrastructure needs that airports are going to have to look at to accommodate that. And we just don't have the money to pay for that right now. You heard the CEO from American Airlines the other day talk about how these new entrants are going to have to start paying their fair share for the operations of the aviation system, but they're also going to have to pay their fair share on the infrastructure side as well. And so far, we haven't figured out how we're going to do that, but we need to get a handle on that moving forward to make sure that we can pay for traditional infrastructure needs and new entrants, and make sure that those aren't interrupting the traditional commercial service and general aviation operations that we have at airports around the country.
Right. And I would just add that even beyond airport infrastructure, which is a little more specialized, where's the electric power coming from and how are we going to distribute it? And will it be available at the airport to allow those technologies to operate? That's a huge issue that's not getting a lot of attention yet. But if you think the pilot shortage is a big deal, wait till California tells you have to have an electric vehicle, but meanwhile don't charge it because we're browning out. So there's some big issues out here that will challenge our industry. And I'm confident that we've got the people in this room that will be able to find those solutions in the years to come. But there's going to be a lot of work to get there.
I feel like we can't have a discussion about community air service without talking about EAS. Thoughts on that program? I know it's I haven't been on the beat very long, but I know in the last reauthorization, which I was sort of the junior reporter, it's always a target. But given what's happening with the system now and service, what do you see? How does EAS fit into this?
Well, you've seen the Essential Air Service Program, the cost balloon in recent years. I think we're at, $450 million a year right now, which is pretty unprecedented when you look at the trajectory of funding for the program, but it just shows you how critical that program is to make sure that airports have access, small communities have access to our transportation system, to ensure that people who live in rural and less populated areas can have access to our transportation system. It's not a perfect program by any means. There could be some improvements made, but at least it's a backstop to make sure that small communities continue to have service. I suspect we'll get into that next year as Congress begins to debate the next FAA reauthorization bill. Traditionally, you've had people, rural lawmakers, stand up and support that program. You've had folks more concerned about spending who don't benefit from EAS who've criticized the program, and in the past that's held up consideration of the FAA reauthorization bill. Hopefully that won't happen this year, but if you look at it politically, you've got a lot of lawmakers, especially like on Senate Commerce Committee, that is dominated by a lot of rural lawmakers who really care about this program. I think they're going to want to continue to invest in that system, even if it's not a perfect solution, to make sure that small communities in their states continue to have service. But we're going to have to look at ways to try to improve that, potentially enhance it, maybe even expand it to help some small communities. At the same time, you've got other airports who don't participate in the program who are concerned about how it's leading to leakage at their facilities, right, and how they're competing with airports down the road with subsidized service when they're not getting the same assistance from the federal government. So it's a balancing act, and we have to look at all those issues, it seems to me.
But I think you made a good point. I mean, just carrying the line out without any other changes, you know, the trend says that they're going to need a bigger budget, right? More communities are going to be into that same situation where they have a demonstrable need for access to the system and don't have it. And so is the country prepared to, and Congress prepared to go add to that budget and make that a bigger commitment?
Well, concurrently, there are a couple ways to approach this, and one of them is absolutely essential, no pun intended, essential air service. The other is to progressively become a less regulated, more technical, lower cost industry, so that the market, the smaller market, has an opportunity to become part of the system. And the technologies that we've spoken about give us that kind of an opportunity. The efficiencies today over 5 decades ago are huge. And to the degree that those efficiencies are able to be continued, then air service will be able to move to smaller and smaller markets and do it economically, not as a result of a subsidy.
Great. I see that long line of people asking questions. Ready to ask questions. I know we need to wrap it up. People are hungry. Any last thoughts from our panel?
Lori, it'd be malpractice of me not to mention the fact that the key to small community air service really is increasing the passenger facility charge. So I know people in this room, FAA will support that initiative, so just a heads up on that, that'll be one of our top priorities next year.
Yeah, I think if you want to find a sustainable business model in small communities, then there's nobody else that's going to do it except for the people in this room. And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm all for EAS and what it does, but that isn't sustainable by definition. So we shouldn't find comfort as a regional airline industry in the EAS. We need to go find where that sustainable model is. We do a great job of sitting here saying what everybody else should do. The small communities should do this. They shouldn't want to leave this. But the next step really is becoming that airline system again, joining the risk side, working with the communities, understanding the passenger at the passenger level rather than at the supply level. And because otherwise the entire conversation is moot. Maybe there's a lost small community air service because nobody wants small community air service. I don't think that's the case. But the alternative needs to be found by us because nobody else is really going to do it. The momentum is against that for sure.
Yeah, I think the record's pretty clear. People do appreciate convenient, regional air service, and it's an industry that grew. The quality of the product offering has enhanced over the last decade. We talked about it yesterday. There's demand out there that's demonstrated every single day. With RASM that's higher domestically now than it ever was before, and a lot of that value is coming from small and mid-sized communities connecting into the big hubs. We have to find a way to unconstrain the access to the resources needed to produce that flying. That's as simple as it is. And we need to use technology, and we need to use other means to find that equation. Value will follow, and people will fly, but not in a constrained world where it's too expensive or constraints reduce the level of service, and that's where we live today. So I don't think you do it through treating the symptom, trying to put communities at war with one another to outbid each other. I think you put it in the hands of folks, airlines that want to serve and have the scale and the economy and the expertise to garner resources, train them, and fly an operation reliably into those communities. Today, that's at risk.
So it's a very challenging time, but it's also a terrific opportunity. And bright minds and good organizations will find a way to cash in on that opportunity. And if you want to see who's going to lead that opportunity, go find a mirror.
Lori, one last comment. I just wanted to thank RAA, Faye, Drew, the entire team. They've really done a great job to shine a light on the air service challenges that all of us are facing. Trying against all odds to focus on the 1,500-hour rule and what we can do to try to enhance the number of pilots that are flying to small communities around the country. So I just want to take my hat off to them for all the good work they're doing in the industry and on Capitol Hill and in the administration. It's yeoman's work, so I just appreciate all their assistance.
Okay. Well, that's wonderful. That's a great way to end. Mike, Brad, Courtney, Dion, thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Lori.
Okay, thank you so much to that excellent panel, and certainly the challenges ahead are enormous, but we've just spent a day and a half talking about how we will solve them, and I liked Mike's comment to solve them, look in the mirror. So thank you for being part of our community. Thank you for being here. I want to recognize one more time our chairman, Dion Flannery, also on 3 panels, so we really put our chairman to work, but did an excellent job. I want to thank our presenting sponsors, Embraer, CAE, GE Aviation, MHIRJ, and Pratt & Whitney Canada for helping us put this on. I want to thank all of the sponsors for being here, and each of you. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank my team, who probably is not here, but hopefully it gets back to them. Sharon, Drew, Naboyo, Michelle, and Jennifer, and our outside team of excellent professionals, Diana, Sarah, Hannah, and Mike. For the media here, we will have a press roundtable at 1:15 in conference room ABC. See Mike Miller, raise your hand if you haven't been added to that and would like to be. For the rest of you, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of our community. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next year. That's a wrap.